Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Option Menu Crew podcast. This is episode 45, and I am your first crew member, your default settings, Ryan, and with me, and our other crew member, Ed, your inverted settings, your inverted camera
Yeah,
settings.
I almost forgot. I was trying to remember. I'm glad you did.
So, yeah, are you going to change settings? Are you ever rotating change of settings, Ed, or are you happy with inverted camera?
Um, for now, that's fine.
Gotcha. Could turn you could we you could switch to aim assist because you're always assisting me. Keep me on target.
Am I? Am I?
Keeping me on target. Yeah. But
Oh
no,
yeah, you do tend to go off on tangents, but I do too. So I can't really say that I only do. I'm the only one who stays on task.
we talk about a lot of fun stuff, and I think we bring up a lot of good points. So the tangents are fun. I don't think anyone listening ever really gets mad about the tangents unless it's super irrelevant to their interests, I guess. Yeah. But this episode, we're going to talk about performance and graphics. And I think that ties into really well something I've been playing. By the time you hear this episode, of course, I may have beaten Elden Ring by this point, but I can't guarantee that. At this point, my save file is currently at 245 some hours. And that's a combination of playing the game, doing grinding, co-oping with some friends, and also some idle time just because I've been leaving the game on in the background a bunch so I can just hop back in and play it whenever I need to. And I've been playing it on PC. So that is something I do want to talk about is how the reviews for this game have been glowing despite obvious performance issues on PC. Uh, the PlayStation 5 version and I think the Xbox version have similar graphic abilities, and the only version that seems to be performing like at a locked 60 FPS is PlayStation 4 version on PS5. I'm not sure about for Xbox how that's working out there. Yeah, we wanted to talk about the state of performance and graphics in video games and various aspects of that today. And it listeners who've been checking out our previous episodes will probably know some of the stuff we're going to bring up. Um, but Ed, I want to toss it over to you for a second there and just kind of start off the conversation. Where's your head been in terms of performance or graphics, for video games over the years, and like where are you now? How do you think of them as composed to like previous years, and do you remember the development of your awareness of these features or aspects?
Well, I think I've been able to tell where the frame rate would dip, and sometimes it would bother me, sometimes it wouldn't. I remember a few years ago playing Fire Emblem Three Houses being frustrated that it would just dip wandering around the environment in, the monastery where you would have little, breaks between battles. And like even that was like, why is this having problems? So like I don't think I've been unable to tell. I don't know if I really like had an issue with the locked 30. Like I played Ratchet and Clank on the PS4 and that seemed okay to me. But I know you would prefer that. You did waited until that played as a 60. So I don't necessarily have a point of comparison for like an individual game as to whether before and after it's that much better. But I guess at this point I want things to be at least a locked 30. But and if it goes below that too much, I think I do notice and it does bother me. Um, but with the new consoles that I now have, I do tend to favor the performance mode, and if it is available, or honestly, I wish they didn't even like have a choice for a fidelity mode because I don't even like the idea of like, well, we're gonna compromise here, but but there are recent games where the performance mode did take a pretty big hit, but I feel like if they focused on hitting a certain performance from the beginning and designed their game around it, they wouldn't have to like compromise as much. So it's like, they would have to compromise in what they can do, but they would go into it with that limitation in mind instead of trying to scale it back and saying, "Oh, what do we have to cut to get it to run?" They would just. So I guess I do care a little bit more now, but if there's a game I really want to play, it usually doesn't prevent me from playing it. But sometimes it does.
Yeah, and we saw during the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era that um, big it was a ongoing situation of performance was being sacrificed uh for graphics, and that persisted a bit into the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One generation as well. Then we got the upgraded consoles with PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, where they had a significant uptick in power. So they started being able to do like the performance modes and things like that, and really started to show off that people do care about these things so much. At the same time, we've kind of hit this sweet spot where games can now look amazing and run at good frame rates. So despite the new visual tricks that they have, like ray tracing and stuff for better lighting, more detailed lighting, or accurate, realistic, um, we're at a point where the hardware is strong enough that we don't need to compromise as much visually to get those frame rates, or we can get the frame rates and at much better levels. There's still like the weird debate about the resolution. Personally, considering how good effects can be, and like for people who play on PC, they know how to experiment with this, and for console gamers, this might be a bit of a tit a bit of a new piece of news, is that like people will often play games still at like 1080p. 4K is not like a huge deal. 4K is very popular on TVs because TVs need to sell, and they need features that convince people that they need to toss out their old TV that still works. And while 4K resolution is definitely very impressive, it's not super critical. And also, some people when they play on PC use smaller monitors. You're talking like the anywhere from laptops of 15 to 17 inches up to 20, 24 inches for standalone monitor, and it's been scaling up to sometimes even in the 30s. Then there's ultra wide, which is a whole different thing. Super wide, ultra wide aspect ratios. But in general, people are still doing the 16 by 9 1080p, and they're turning up graphic effects so that way the visuals can be as crisp and clean as possible. Anti-aliasing technology, which basically like smooths out rough edges and makes the image look very crisp and clear. Tech has been getting better in that regard. So that is how graphic load has been like changed. And then on consoles, now that we have some of the graphic modes, it's nicer to be able to switch between an experiment. But yeah, we don't need super big 4K. And if you look into the news and when they talk about the games and their different visual modes, they talk about like different types of rendering styles where they're not really doing the highest resolution. It's rarely a true 4K. They're doing some sort of upscaling in order to get the image as high resolution as they possibly can without losing too much performance, because if they ran it at true 4K all the time, they'd have to either compromise on a bunch of visual effects or the frame rate. And a lot of people want frame rate. Now that's what happens usually between the two modes, is you like lock it at 30 and you can get like true 4K or much closer to 4K. And then they can also turn on other visual effects. And the reverse is opposite. The reverse is true, where it's like they'll usually lock it to a lower resolution so they can get 60 FPS, and then certain visual effects are turned down and whatnot. And I'm not trying to use the episode to like explain all the different effects that go into this. We're talking a little bit more broad strokes, because even though I play a lot on PC, I think that's probably one of the biggest barriers to entry, and something that I feel is like the heart, or one of the seemingly most daunting learning curves, is you go in, you start up a game, and if the game's not running well, what do you do? And you can not only just set, there's usually like a general setting of like low, medium, high, maximum in terms of graphic settings, and it switches everything based on what the developer considers each of those to be a preset. And and then you can customize each one. And sometimes games are pretty well optimized, but it's like one or two things where if you just like switch this down, like if you set it to high and you take this one setting and switch it down to like low, the game doesn't look drastically worse and it runs significantly better or more stably. And that's like a learning curve that I think a lot of people who play on console don't want to have to deal with, besides like some other factors. Um, Now, Ed, I know you're not a huge fan of PC. You haven't chosen to invest in that yet, but like, does any of that factor into your thinking of like avoiding PC, or is that just completely aside from like your personal reasons currently that you haven't invested in PC?
Um, I could probably manage it just fine if I wanted to play on PC. I don't necessarily want to build a PC and deal with maintaining it, or I know you can get pre-builts, but I also don't want to spend the amount of money that you need to get to where I feel like PC is worth it. Like I feel like if you're gonna play on PC, like part of the reason to do that is to get the better graphical fidelity than you would on console. So I feel like it's like, and I have the and I also it's also the case that there are exclusives on PlayStation to where even if I had a PC, I'd have to get a PlayStation and Switch and
Yeah.
um I don't know. I'm used to what I'm doing now, so I'm not looking to change anything. But no, I think I could manage that just fine.
Sorry, Ed, I have to poke a little bit of fun. So what you're telling me is that it's too expensive for you to buy the latest Mac and PC. So you have to just put all your money towards the Mac, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of it is I like the Mac better. So yeah, I do like Mac OS better. I don't necessarily like Windows as much, so that's part of it. Yeah.
I'm just yeah, I was just poking fun
But
because
I don't even necessarily want to use Windows regardless.
Mhm.
So
Gotcha, gotcha. Um, Yeah, and we talked about it a little bit before, but I guess we can bring this up, and I want to segue back to my point about Elden Ring. Is Elden Ring has been getting tons of extremely high praise, and I think it is mostly well deserved. I think the game design, to some degree, is still flawed around the edges. The core is really good in terms of the open world is dense, full of things to find and new experiences, and going through that game, truly, you can go through that game multiple ways and discover different stuff. It is very possible to beeline to the end of the game, and then there's also quests and things that like if you just go in a slightly different direction, you will find a whole bunch of other stuff or completely change the quest. There's multiple endings, and it requires certain uh, taking certain paths or doing certain quests in order to achieve those alternate endings. So it's very good in those regards. But then there's certain aspects about the controls. There's certain aspects about the enemy design, the uh, games, some of the glitches, the multiplayer aspects, some of the way the features are implemented. That's just it's rough around the edges. On top of performance being an issue, and I've heard many different things. I can't conclusively say what the issues are in terms of the optimization for Elden Ring, but I can say as someone who's using a laptop with a 37 laptop level card in it, um, in order for me to get the most stable experience, I have to play it at 1080p, and I play it at high. I turn down like foliage one level just to help because that can is one of the common things that can typically like add to render load. And the game is natively locked to 60 FPS. It can't go higher right now. That's just like an engine limitation that FromSoft put in on the game. Not sure exactly why. Little bit of history is that the old FromSoft games, the reason why it took so long for them to get re-optimized is that FromSoft was doing a very old, antiquated programming technology in which they locked animations to frame rate and frame timing, which meant that if you doubled that or increased it, it meant that things moved faster in the game naturally. They weren't decoupled from each other. So that was something that had to be completely like recoded and refixed. And I think it was like starting with Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro and maybe even Elden Ring, unless they're now just doing that, but for 60 FPS is their frame timing. You can't do really dynamic not resolutions, but frame rates. That may get fixed, not sure. Um, but the game still stutters and does not maintain a solid 60 in a bunch of places, or especially if I'm exploring a new area or if enough enemies get on screen. So it can be very inconsistent. And while I can't say the frame rate has contributed to many, many, if any, portions where like I would say the death was specifically the death I had or the failure I had was specifically due to the frame rate. It is jarring and it's just unfortunate that like even at a lower setting, which my card should totally be able to do, and also you can look at the Digital Foundry video, like they tested a whole bunch of stuff, like even at the lowest settings, it's still inconsistent. Do I think the game deserves to be this 9 or 10 out of 10 game? And I would have to say, trying to think more critically about it, and like I said, 240 hours in, I've been playing this a ton. I'm playing with friends I didn't think were going to play it are playing it and loving it. Long time from soft fans I know are loving it. Um, I'm starting to say like I think it would have to be like definitely a 9, but maybe even closer to an 8, just because some of this stuff is very uh is just there's not really an excuse for it. And I get the rest of the game's good, great even. Um, but all of it together, it's kind of unfortunate. Ed, do you have what's your opinion? Refresh us on your opinion when it comes to visuals and performance for games and how you feel that should affect the reviews.
Well, the last game that really bothered me with regards to performance, and I think I've harped upon it a bit too much in past episodes, was Shin Megami Tensei 5. And I really had a hard time. I found it was very unenjoyable to explore just the basic world and deal with interacting with enemies on the map just because it was very sluggish and the draw distance was very poor and really the resolution was pretty low, so it was kind of blurry. Like there were a lot of issues with it, and I don't think the reviews did a good job communicating that. I think a lot of them really glossed over those details and didn't really um I don't know. I either they didn't feel they were important or they just weren't being honest about it. Like I don't know why that wasn't mentioned very often, but it really was very bad. And I wish I do think it should affect the review scores. I mean, video games are an interactive medium, so it's like that the way you interact with games is important, and having a responsive frame rate and responsive controls are kind of like a key part of those. So I do think it should affect that. I I think unfortunately just a lot of people either are fans of the series or especially for these like very difficult niche games, they kind of have to get someone who is like familiar with the series to review it, because like someone who is unfamiliar with a Souls game, I think a lot of the reviewers who did end up reviewing Elden Ring didn't even finish it. They got 60 hours in and were like, okay, I can give my opinion, but I don't know. Should they have been able to? Because a lot of the later, like more detailed impressions I read on it were talking about how later in the game was more unbalanced because they felt there were difficulty spikes that were not as enjoyable as early in the game, and that some of the material economy was a little stingier than they would like. So there were issues that maybe if they had played 100 or 200 hours of the game like you or some other YouTubers I've watched who actually waited to make their video on it, maybe they wouldn't have scored as high. So that's kind of beside the point for performance, but I do think like sometimes reviewers go in being a big fan of the game just because to actually be able to review those games in the time allotted, they need to have some familiarity with the mechanics and the systems, and that can make it so that someone who reviews a game is blind or at least dismissive of issues that someone who is not like a fan would find more problematic. And maybe that's what people want out of reviews. Maybe like fans want to know if a game is going to be what they expect from that series. But I mean, every game should be seeking to expand their audience, and I think that a review should at least take into account someone who's going to go into a series maybe not having played every prior game. But that kind of gets into the conversation of what is a review for, and I guess it means a lot of different things to different people.
Yeah, there's definitely a very subjective aspect to it, and I think before we segue from the performance over into graphics a little bit is uh like with frame rate and stuff, it's something where we were acclimated a lot to lower frame rates. I remember I didn't really notice what the difference was between 30 and 60 for a long time, and I know I would bounce back and forth between some games that were 60 and some games that were 30. I didn't really understand. Like games just felt a certain way. You know, you played this game, it felt this way. You played this game, it felt that way. I didn't understand what was going on. And then it suddenly became much more of a hot topic. And then as I played more games at 60, I then learned and educated myself and was educated as well from talking to friends and family, well, friends, reading online from games journalist outlets and all that stuff, or games news outlets, and learning about that stuff. It was like, oh, now I understand what's going on here. But until then, I didn't really notice it. And it's only once I started paying attention and had more exposure that now I'm like, oh, I get that this feels a certain way and this is going to look a certain way. And now I can pay attention to it and I understand what I'm looking for. So I wonder if, like, if the companies had just stayed at 30 the entire time, what would have happened? And, would we have even noticed? Would it have been that big a deal? Um, Segueing over into to visuals though, and that clearly I think we agree like that should affect reviews, like, but it's an art style thing. It's really tough to say, other than like, is things communicated clearly to you, and that's both like in normal and considering also accessibility features in which like text size or object highlighting or hearing assistive or sight assistive features and stuff like that.
Colorblind,
Yeah, stuff like that.
colorblind
um
settings.
I just want to give a shout out. Accessibility settings matter, and I'm not talking just difficulty. It's a whole different thing. It's a whole different conversation. And I don't want to get into that about Elden Ring right now, or any other games right now. Uh, but yeah, for visual wise, Ed, tell me about like when video games, like what kind of art styles and things do you usually prefer, or what sticks out to you, what attracts you, what repulses you? Give me some lowdown on that.
Um, what? I mean, I played a lot of games where I really did like the art and I did like the graphics. I mean, the game that sticks out to me most in recent years that I thought was just for the most part really looked incredible and well polished was Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PlayStation 5. Um the only part of that game that I thought needed a little more polish, which I guess is understandable, is where some of the NPC models were just kind of trash. Like some of them were really bad, but the main characters, like the character models were incredible. I thought some of the environments were just like Wall Market was like looked crazy good. So much detail and the lighting with all the because it's at night and there's all these like neon lights like that. I thought that looked incredible. So I was really blown away by that. Um, and I and that isn't really like it's going for a realistic look, but it's definitely stylized in some of the character models, and they look a little less like the proportions are slightly off. Like the eyes are, it's like not exactly. I mean, it's hard to describe. Like it's not like it's they didn't use motion capture. They didn't go off a real person. They're all art, but
Oh,
I thought that something I like all the character models. Like some they have their own style. Like I liked it.
definitely motion
Uh,
captured, but I think what you meant is like facial captured
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
or
It's
directly
not,
facial modeled off
but it
of real
wasn't.
people.
It wasn't like modeled after a real person. I guess is what I mean.
Yeah.
Was it? I don't think so.
I mean, I'm sure they used some references to get that, and I understand what you're saying about it's hard to describe. I've landed on like it's highly detailed, abstracted realism.
Yeah, okay, that's a
because
good
like
way to put it.
the way the skin and the pores and how close they try to get to like some realistic proportions. Obviously, Barrett is like much bigger of a man than like any
Than
most
anything
humans
could
could
ever
be.
Yeah.
Um, is like so it's they're going for a certain amount of realism because a lot of proportions for the bodies are very close to like realistic, but then like liberties are taken. But there's high
Yeah,
detail in terms of like, it's not cell shading. It's not like these cartoony looking characters. They have skin textures, they have facial hair, they have individual hairs. You can see all this extra detail. So yeah, that's the highly detailed abstracted realism. And I would say the same thing about like um the Last of Us, which The Last of
mhm.
Us and The Last of Us Part 2, that like that for the most part, those games are very, very realistic, but they're still going for like an abstracted realism. Um, they're going much closer to it, but there's still like, some there because as good as these as messed up as these people look, like they definitely look like people you'd see around the street, but there's elements that are just not quite correct.
Whereas, like, with Death Stranding, it's all, like, motion captured facial animations and
Death Stranding would
eh
also fall into that where it's like this abstracted realism,
yeah, I
especially
like that's another one I thought looked fantastic. So, I definitely like when games go for, like, that highly detailed realism and, they pull it off. I guess, Red Dead Redemption 2 is another one that
yes,
looks really good.
yep,
So,
definitely
like,
going for
with
realism.
those high budget games where they really put in the effort to make like, it's I think look, when environments looks like it's good, but I think really what brings it together for me is character models that, like, can really push the narrative. Because I do like games with a strong narrative, and I feel more connected to the characters when I can, get, uh, you know, see them emote. But I also do like more stylized games. Like I like games that take an anime style. Like I liked Fire Emblem Three Houses, and recently I finished Persona 5 Royal, which I loved. It really ranks up there as one of the best games I've played in a long time. And those those ones, they do a good job with their characters too. Obviously not realistic, but they do a good job having their characters express themselves. I think the strength of the art in those is really what brings it forward. um one thing in a lot of those types of games that they do is they'll have character portraits by the dialogue, so they'll be changing their expression as the emotion in their lines changes, so that makes a difference. um I'm gonna play Triangle Strategy pretty soon. And that's all like the HD 2D pixel art, but they don't have any character portraits. So I was playing the demo and like that was lacking to me in the sense that like you don't you don't get the character portraits change their expression as they're delivering their lines. So that I guess what I'm saying is I feel like I can appreciate a wide variety of art. I think there are some people who really they only want to play games where it's as realistic as possible, and I'm definitely not like that.
Yeah, it's definitely a shame when people don't give like more abstract art styles chance. I remember distinctly, like Ed, you're familiar enough with Borderlands art style, right?
I think I played some of the first game, a limited amount of it. On I actually think I played it back on PC when I was a PC. I used the game on PC. I don't know if you knew that. I did have a
You
PC
did
at one
mention that,
point.
yeah, for a little bit. But yeah, so for those who have not seen it, and Ed, you can always just Google it if you want to look up side for reference. They do this very comic booky art style texturing on their characters. Like they draw in the lines and stuff so that way things look drawn in, but there's a lot of detail into the drawing. Another game that did something similar to this was the Prince of Persia remake. Well, not remake, but the Prince of Persia soft
The
reboot,
2008 one.
the 2008 one, which is also extremely
I
impressive.
actually played that too.
I played it a little bit. I meant to go beat it, but I just at the time I was
I
not ready
didn't
to
beat
commit
it,
to it.
but I had fun with it.
Yeah, it seemed super fun. It did some things that I really liked. I need to go back and like just actually play and beat that game. But yeah, it was I remember back then, I was totally into it. I thought it looked really cool, and before they didn't have that art style. They were going for a much more, like, traditional, at the time, Xbox 360, like, PS3 level shooting for realism of some sort. Then they switched to the art style because they changed a bunch of things, and they needed the game to, like, pop in terms of looking, uh, but in comparison to other things, and that worked out really well for them, I think. But I remember some friends of mine that I was saying, like, "I'm really hyped for this game, guys. I think it's gonna be super awesome. I think you guys will like it too." Them saying, like, this one buddy, he ends up playing the game on my recommendation, loving it. He's even more hardcore into it than I am. And he's like, "Dude, I just hate how this game looks, but this game is so fun to play." I'm like, "Really? But this is such a unique art style." He's like, "Yeah, no, I just hate it."
Which
S-
game?
Borderlands.
Oh, okay, yeah,
And
yeah.
specifically one, but like the art style carried through and was refined and updated in games. But it's just like there's people where it's just like that's not they don't like certain art styles and certain things, which I understand. There's certain art styles I'm not a fan of, but um, when it comes to like comic booky or abstract or cartoony art styles, like I'm all about it. I like it. Certain ones, like there's certain cartoony art styles that don't jive with me, but there's a lot that do. Breath of the Wild we talk about. I love that style there. I thought Skyward Sword also had a really neat aesthetic going on. It could I would have liked to I prefer Breath of the Wild's version of it, but I don't mind like the pastelly texture effects that they had in uh Skyward Sword. And then also I will always
How could we forget Okami? I don't know if you were gonna
I was literally just gonna say that. I'm like, and I will bring up every single time I can Okami and how it is such a distinct, interesting, unique art style that just like to this day still looks so good and fresh. And you just there are some other games that have mimicked the style or have I should say have shared the style. Um, but they just oh man, and of course segueing to something that more than one person loves, let's talk about Vanillaware and their games. Like the art style and the way they handle their 2D characters. Because like we played 13 Sentinels. I don't know if you've had a chance to play Muramasa the Demon Blade, Ed, on Wii.
I haven't played any other Vanillaware games.
Oh, and of course Odin Sphere. Like Odin Sphere predates all those things. Dragon's Crown, of course, is there too. But yeah, Muramos the Demon Blade, which started out as a Wii exclusive, and I think it got a Vita port. And sadly, that game deserves to be ported to modern platforms and PC. But like you can see Dragon's Crown in that's a medieval version of it, and then Japanese aesthetic in Muramasa. Like on the Wii, even though the Wii was at like 480p, like it because of the way they did that, it just looked so good regardless. And that's where, with visuals, people get so hooked on realism and stuff like that, and they don't have whatever reason they can't do a suspension of disbelief or things like that. Um, Also, cultural stigmas about like things that are animated are for kids and they're immature, which is the complete opposite of the truth. And it's like those things hold up longer over time in terms of visuals. Talk about Super Metroid. You love talking about Super Metroid. Pixel art, when done well, holds up forever because it's a specific style that just scales well. And the same thing goes on for any sort of abstracted art styles. Um, I do want to give a shout.
I feel like some people who don't appreciate pixel art just maybe didn't grow up ever playing. Like they might have grown up past the point where pixel art games really were common. I mean,
Yeah,
the very first games I played were on the Game Boy Advance, which was like, a portable SNES pretty much in terms
yeah.
of its capabilities. Maybe better in some ways, worse in others. But like, I remember I remember thinking like Golden Sun was like the best looking game on that system, and it really is a great looking game. But like I feel like someone who's like 10 years old now would go back and play that and be like, "What is this crap? This looks terrible." So
Yeah.
it's like I part of it might be just our bias, maybe having a little earlier experience with those types of games.
I definitely think it
But
helps.
maybe if we had kids and we forced them to get started on classics, they would be able to appreciate them too. But then I read all these stories online of people like, I see like TikToks where some guy's like panning over all his game collection, and then at the end you see the kid just wanting to play Fortnite over and over again, and they're like, "What's wrong with kids these days?" So it's like, I don't know if you can force someone to really appreciate something they're just not interested in.
Yeah, I think it's important to call out there that like back then we hadn't it was new. So that's the thing is we saw the pinnacle of technology at the time for that stuff. And I think we all knew like deep down in our hearts this was bad. Like the old stuff just for the most part looked bad. It did, but it did the trick, and we filled in points with our imagination. And the act of playing and this thing that moved on the TV that normally was like we can't interact with it, we just get information from it. But now we can actually put things in and get feedback out. Was novel enough that it pushed it through. And so now we're at the point where we don't even have to do that. And so people can choose to have interesting art styles, and can harken back to old pixel art days. And I'm not a person, and this is with respect to the older art styles. I'm not someone who craves the older art styles. I am the guy who is looking at the box art going, I can't wait for what I see on the box with all like the crazy art. Like look at you can once again we'll talk Super Metroid right there. The Super Metroid box art and the great, shot of Samus and Ridley and be like, I can't wait for the game to look like that. And we're here now. We're there. And that's amazing. Even better to some degree, depending on it. Not we can't reach every single stylization that we've ever had, but we're making huge leaps and bounds into it. Like I had to gush over Tales of Arise is like anime games just look like anime games now. And it's before there was growing pains and certain ones look great, someone look better or worse, and I'll harken back to Kingdom Hearts because there was that way back then. But like now, anime characters can just look like anime characters. Like Scarlet Nexus and Tales of Arise look great, and Tales of Arise did a very cool thing where they applied a like brushstroke filter or something like that over everything, so everything kind of started to look cohesive. And that's a thing that really gets to me is I don't really care if it's realism or abstracted or non-realism. I want cohesiveness. There's little things that do bother me, and I think some of it like is it's all like first world problem type stuff. It's nitpicking at this point. Like objects in games before couldn't really be round. Things had to be octagonal because it was just in order to do enough polygons to make something look round, it would have like been the entire cartridge at the time or the entire disk of data to get something like that actually round. Or it would have to be a texture on something. But now things can be round. And now it kind of bugs me when things aren't quite round or when I know they should be and it's just like it's not. Then there's also like foliage. That's a thing that can get weird. Like and it's secondary, so a lot of stuff you can just kind of hand wave away because you're playing the game, you're engaging. But like you look at tree roots, like where trees meet the ground, and it never quite looks right. It still doesn't look quite right, but we're getting there. Or also how like leaf textures are typically like flat and they have like no substance to them, and when you rotate it, when you walk your character around them, it's just a 2D texture that's rotating in your
Hair.
perspective. Hair's a lot better. But yes, hair used to be really bad. But we're getting
Hands. Do you remember like when hands were just like paws?
yes.
That always bothered me.
Yeah.
Like when they started actually modeling the fingers, like even if it was rudimentary, I was so
Fingers.
much happier with the way it looked.
You can't say fingers anymore without me thinking Elden Ring. You hear the word fingers so much in that game. Like, the
Do you really?
fingers, the two fingers. They're like some sort of like celestial being thing. Yeah, it's wild. Elden Ring lore and story is wild. But yes, all that stuff like is now so amazingly good. And I want to give a shout out to Days Gone for having probably the best foliage I've seen in like a game. I haven't played Horizon Forbidden West yet. Horizon 1 had pretty good
Better
foliage.
than Red Dead Redemption 2?
Yes. Because the way oh, also Ghost of Tsushima, never mind. Days Dawn was really good for like random real world stuff. Ghost of Tsushima with its foliage tech and how solid its frame rate was blows my mind. Probably Ghost of Tsushima does foliage tech the best. I haven't seen, like I said, Horizon 2, I haven't really played around with much, so I can't really comment. Um, but right now, Ghost of Tsushima did it the best. And they did it at a slightly abstracted realism. And like they motion capped a bunch of characters, facial captured a bunch of people for actors and whatnot. And it's, that game right there. Like if you're going for like it and Last of Us Part 2, I will say are probably like the two in terms of like if you're going for realism, this is the level to be at. Um, Harkening back to Fortnite, I don't think there's anything wrong with Fortnite's art style. I like its art style. I think it has so many character designs that are wasted on a one note game like it is. But I just am not interested, and I'm aware that no build mode has gone live, and a lot more people are interested in it now that there is a no build mode in it, or it is the new standard. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's it's just wild. How good our games look and how you can go in either direction, realism or not, and look at that. And some it makes the little flaws stick out more. Um, I remember playing. It was a Ninja Theory game. Journey, not Journey to the West. What was Enslaved? It was called.
Enslaved,
Yeah,
is the best. I played that, and I remember liking that.
I remember that game. The facial capture was good, but also it was the eyes. Like the way they rendered the eyes and the way the eyes moved, I like it stuck out to me as like holy holy cow, that is exactly like that's so real. These characters feel so real, and it's amazing despite like the PS3, Xbox 360 level like geometry and textures of the characters. I was just like they animating well. And we see this in like Disney and Pixar movies. Like they don't need different elements feel real to us as humans, and it's a psychology thing. So when like mouths, lips, eyes, eyebrows, and like hands and body stuff moves the right way and moves in an expressive way, it doesn't really matter how realistic the character looks. They can have eyes that are 2/3 their head. They can have these mouths that are as small as a fingernail. Like it's not about those kind of things that create the uncanny valley. So you can work within those stylized things. But then there's like games like Mass Effect 1 and 2. Like 1, characters were very stiff. And when you talk to them, like they tried to do some early animation and facial capture and mouth movements and stuff. But when you're talking to NPCs, they're just not emoting properly with talking. They fixed that a bunch with 2. They got even better with 3. And that's one of those things where it takes a lot of work to do this. I'm not saying like this is easy. And I know it took a lot of work to get there. But these are like the things where we're finally here with a lot of this. And then also obvious shout out, of course, Red Dead Redemption 2, but Witcher 3. And just like I remember reading about with Geralt in his conversations, because things were kind of static for the most part. But Geralt, he's a very stoic individual, it's fine. But they like built a whole bunch of tech for just animating his eyebrows properly, and it made such a world of difference for each conversation. Like the animation tech in games is now so incredible, and it's now getting to the point where it's just these little details that like things are getting worked out. And I'm gonna throw to a different example. But Ed, were there any other like specific things that have been stuck out to you? Doesn't have to be the same thing as I, but like visually in video games that have really impressed you over the last couple of years.
Um, well, I just want to say you mentioned Pixar, and I think Pixar and DreamWorks and Illumination, some of those movie studios are a perfect example of proof that it's not just realistic games or movies that benefit from improved graphical tech. Like, I don't know, have you watched Shrek recently? Have you I don't know if you I watched that recently. That movie is so primitive in its 3D tech, like, it's really funny, like, it still holds up, but I remember watching, in particular, the Pixar movie Soul I think I watched it last year, and just being blown away by how detailed some like, the characters look so goofy, like, they're all silly looking, but, like, some of the stuff like the brass instruments in those movies, like the reflections in those, like I was blown away by how far digital animation had come. And I guess if you're talking about game examples like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, Like, I was actually looking at some videos of like the original Ratchet and Clank and how like it does. I don't think it looks bad, but the lack of detail there, like there's so much detail and fidelity, and even in the performance mode of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, that like I can't believe how far it's come. And I remember loving the Ratchet and Clank games on the PlayStation 2. So it's like it's not like I didn't play them and enjoy them, but I was watching like I said, a video of the original Ratchet and Clank, like the early levels, and I think the one thing that stood out to me was just how sparse the geometry was. Like there wasn't as much density in the environments. Like there were the enemies were kind of moving around slower, and like it was like it's huge the difference the technology's made, and I think like that's why I think people are crazy to dismiss the need for a more powerful Nintendo console, saying, oh, they only do cartoony games. I'm like, so what? Those would look better with more graphical tech. Like those would be more enjoyable. Like, you can't tell me that something like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart would look, would be the same if it were running on the PlayStation 4 or the PlayStation 3. It just wouldn't. So it's like, I guess my point is like, even the games that you and I know we both really like animation and stylized graphics. Like you and I like anime. You and I like tons of Western animated shows as well. So like I think we're people who can appreciate that. But and I guess that's part of the reason why I really do, even though many of those the types of games that I like are stylized. That's why I am happier that we're still progressing from a graphical level.
Yeah.
But what was your next example
I was
that you
gonna
were gonna?
harken back to when a visual upgrade happened that I actually wasn't very happy with. But before I do that, I want to at least mention a few more like really good looking or really interesting, unique art style games, and some
Oh,
indies specifically.
Psychonauts 2. I want to
Yes.
shout out
So
that. I don't know if you were gonna say that, but I
no,
want to
I
shout out that as being
sorry.
so great looking for and honestly, I think even playing it on the Series X, you could tell that it looked like a next gen version of what like I think it you could tell that it really they took advantage of all the power to have the models, even though they sometimes they even look grotesque in a way, the how weird they look, but the colors were great, and they were very very detailed, so I was happy with that.
Yeah, I want to shout out some smaller games, and I'll mix in some indies and also some like, well, the indies that were published by big people. Yes, Psychonauts 2, very very great. Um, Cuphead as well, incredible work that those guys have done. Microsoft is publishing them, but like, good on Microsoft for giving that team the time they need to do that. Um, Oxenfree is another great one. I want to call it the game Sable. It's more recent. That one's got a really neat art style, and also like it does a very deliberate animation frame rate on the characters, which is very unique look. Um, Anno Mutationum is a more recent indie game. It's got some mixed reviews, but the art style is incredible, and the way they're doing this like uh 2D with 3D depth and moving in and out of fields with static cameras and some side scrolling. That's pretty cool. Um, Going through some stuff here.
I have one more that I thought
Go
of.
ahead, name it while I'm looking.
Um, Fantasian, the JRPG on the iPad and iOS and
Okay.
all the Apple systems. What they did with the environments was just so creative. I don't know if you know, but they actually built over 150 little dioramas for each of
Yes.
the set pieces, and they made a digital model of each of them.
Yeah.
The only point where it suffers is if the camera zooms in too much, you can see the textures are not high enough res to support it.
Yeah.
But like zoomed out, it looks like you're playing like with a little dollhouse. It's so cool.
Yeah. Chris Tales,
Yes,
1980X.
I saw that one.
Let's see. For one. Oh, Kane and Bridge of Spirits was really good. I mentioned that. Looked really pretty. That was like getting close to like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart levels of like detail. I know you bounced off it, Ed, but you got to admit that game looks pretty good visually.
Maybe I'll go back and give it another try. It's still sitting on my shelf.
It's no big deal. Uh oh, shoot, I just played it on PS5. It's made by the people who did Hyper Light Drifter. I feel bad that I'm forgetting the name. I actually really enjoyed that game. That one had performance issues. Which
Solar Ash.
Solar Ash, thank you so much. That game's great. What else? Oh, I played it on PS5 also. It was an indie game. I played it really early.
The Pathless.
The Pathless, thank you. That also is fantastic, and that just feels that was such a good open world. They just announced Hyperlight Breaker, which looks like it has a really good art style to it. And of course, I could gush about a bunch of fighting games. Skullgirls, I'll give a shout out to. They're just that team is excellent for their 2D creations there. Yeah, a lot of these games look really good. And a lot of 2D games still can be done extremely well. 3D, like yeah, there's more and more with better and more creative art styles out there. I mean I could go through my whole Steam library, and if I was pulling up the picture by picture, then I could totally recommend a bunch. I'm just trying to look at the ones I've recently played because I was just going through stuff here.
Paper Mario, the Origami King. I'm looking at the list
I
of games
Yep, that was a bigger title. Or that one looks
that
really
was not an
good.
indie, but I'm just looking
Yeah.
at the list of games that I played in the past few years, see if anything stands out to me. But that one was amazing looking. Especially on the Switch. I don't know how they got it to look so good.
Yeah, I'm trying to highlight some indie games over or smaller titles rather than
Okay, yeah,
Bloodstained
yeah.
Ritual of the Night. They did a huge graphical overhaul for that before the release, and that game looks great. You know, Castlevania, um, revamp. What else here? Oh,
I
I did.
guess we really got to be grateful that honestly we have like such a plethora of games with just like fantastic art styles and
Yeah.
technical merits and like I know a lot of people like to have nostalgia for like, past eras of games, but I'm very pleased with what's available to
Oh,
me to
oh.
play right now.
I will shout out Ori, the two Ori games, Will o' the
Mm.
Wisps and the Blind Forest. Those are both extremely beautiful games. Once again, published by Microsoft, so not necessarily that, but they took some big risks on that. A long time ago, I played this really cool horror puzzle game called White Knight. That's a really good one. It's a black and white aesthetic. There's an upcoming game like on the PlayStation Direct that's also going to do like the Kurosawa style, like black shades of black and white.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah. I
uh,
saw that.
I forgot the name of that one. It's on my list to play though. Inside's really good. Now I'm blanking on the one before that. Limbo, excellent art styles, excellent art direction. Transistor and Bastion. Come on. Let's see. Anything else I could call out? Oh, Little Nightmares. I haven't played Little Nightmares 2 yet, but I really want to. That one's really good. Gris, another indie platformer game, GRIS. That one's really good.
Mhm. Yeah, I've heard of
That's
that one.
beautiful game. Music's incredible. I bought that soundtrack immediately. Oh, Killer Queen Black. That's a multiplayer focused game. That's got some really good pixel art and really good animations to it. So that one's really nice.
I feel like you could just make a list of like hundreds of games long. That's what I'm saying though.
Nidhogg.
Like
That's not necessarily smaller, but yeah.
it's just
So yeah,
I'm grateful that we have so many
yes.
amazing options.
Yes, so many good art styles and unique and just well pulled off and stuff. And so I hope more people appreciate it. So let me do an example where graphics improved in the game and I didn't like it. I actually didn't find it more appealing in most ways. And that was with Kingdom Hearts. I am so used to the way that Kingdom Hearts did its shading for the characters with baked in lighting and textures for the characters from 1 all the way up through Kingdom Hearts 3D, Dream Drop Distance. But when the version with 0.2 came out in the collection for Aqua's little side story leading up to Kingdom Hearts 3 and the Kingdom Hearts 3 design, final thing, I actually thought the characters didn't look as good as they used to. I liked the kind of baked in texturing on there. I didn't like the dynamic lighting on the texturing of the characters. The only time in Kingdom Hearts 3 that I was like, this looks great. This reminds me of like what I feel Kingdom Hearts should look like is in Winnie the Pooh's section in Kingdom Hearts 3. You go there and everything's kind of like more flat shaded and pastel-y, and there's some like dynamic lighting and shadow in there, but it's just a different like aesthetic, which is great. And I was like, I wish the rest of the game looked like this, and then they worked around that. It's so I just there was a certain feel to the way the characters looked to me that I appreciated so much more than the way the characters looked in the new one. I think they looked more plasticky, and that rarely bothers me. Someone when I was looking at Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 on the Switch, I loved the art style for the characters on there. Like I've played Avengers, and yeah, it's a decent looking game, Marvel's Avengers, but I way more prefer the highly stylized stuff for comic book characters and the way uh Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 looked on Switch, minus the frame rate issues and some stuff like that. Um and I
But
was
you
just
liked Guardians of the Galaxy, and
Guardians
that's
of-
very I guess that's not very realistic. It like goes for a
it's
realistic
abstract.
look, but
It's more abstract realism. It's Final
yeah,
Fantasy VII levels of it's very
yeah.
detailed. Everything in there is like fantastical, but like there's some facial capture and some mo capture, and definitely a lot of mocap. It's just yeah, it's really impressive, and there's a bunch of alien worlds. Like the what you described about Wall Market is like the entire game of Guardians
Oh,
of the
really?
Galaxy. Like you just
Oh
walk around, you're
man,
like,
that has me more interested in it.
yeah, like you don't even have to play. Just go look at some videos and like the crazy alien worlds and stuff like that you go to are just so well realized. It feels like a high budget CG movie that's a playable video game. I mean, like it's a Ratchet and Clank. It's just like whoa, and the writing is on point. Once again, super subjective whether or not the humor lands for you. It landed for me. I think a lot. Also, the emotional stuff. I just started getting choked up when I thought of like the one scene or like there's like three scenes in that game that are just beautiful emotional moments, and I started thinking of them and hearing the lines in my head, and I just got super choked up immediately. Oh my god, I'm uh I'm losing it here. They nailed it. That game. Oh, Square Enix, you are so despicable. Square Enix's management is so despicable, saying that game didn't live up to expectations.
I don't know what their expectations are. So whoever's setting those expectations needs to like recalibrate.
They want Call of Duty numbers. That's what every silly Japanese
But
company
but
wants.
they're not gonna get Call of Duty
They're,
numbers.
I know they're
Nobody
dumb.
gets Call of Duty numbers except Call of Duty and maybe like Grand Theft Auto,
Yeah, and I mean,
Mario Kart.
Sony's set good expectations. Like they're super happy that like uh you know Ghost of Tsushima's going on like 10 million. Horizon went over 10 million. Horizon 2, I'm not sure, but I'm sure that's on track. The Last of Us, they create these big multi-million dollar games and that multi-million copies sold. Like they make the money off these. So it's not like you can't make money off of big single player action adventure games. You just have to like set your expectation. You just have to be willing to accept that they're not going to make as much as a big multiplayer game. And you need to know
Returnal and Ratchet didn't sell like millions of copies.
and they're both critically acclaimed games. Especially like
Yeah.
Returnal has that FromSoft feel because it's like a difficult game, which is fine. Roguelikes and all that. That's a genre that is respected. They did a huge update for that, a free update. You're getting co-op. You're getting a whole new mode. Like that's incredible. Like that's like what they did with Ghost of Tsushima, where they supported it and put out an entire multiplayer mode. Now they're like you can charge for it separately if you don't want to buy the full game, which those people are weird. Why wouldn't you just buy the full adventure and get that included? But still, like Sony's doing it right. So the fact that Square Enix can't look at the bigger company and go, "Oh, well, yeah, um, it's
I
silly."
don't think it's a fair comparison though. At least not completely because Sony They put out games because they want to sell more systems. Like the more people buy PlayStations, the more they're buying third-party software, and they get a cut of every sale. So like Square Enix, their software products kind of have to stand on their own two legs. So it's like not quite apples to apples. Like Sony can afford to invest a lot in a game like Ratchet that might only sell a few million because they know it's going to get, that's part of the reason I got a PlayStation 5 as soon as I did because I wanted to play that. So that to me was a system seller. And to some people, that's going to get a few more people buying a PlayStation 5 who are then going to be in that ecosystem spending money. So it's like they're not quite apples to apples.
Very
And
fair point. And as long as we're talking about Square Enix, we might as well shout out another little game that they produced that we both personally have in our hearts. The World Ends with You and Neo: The World Ends
oh
with You.
yeah. Well,
I
you don't like the first one. You don't like the
ah
first one.
I said the controls could be better. It didn't need to be that didn't need to have its gimmicks. That's what I said.
No way. It's perfect. It's perfect.
Anyway, on that note, side note, I've noticed on their Twitter feed that they've been putting out pictures of the older characters that were appearing in the new game, so I'm getting a little bit spoiled. But that I'm fine with that because I think they're gearing up for that announcement for the Steam release. Weirdly
Oh
enough,
yeah, yeah.
weirdly enough, no Kingdom Hearts Steam release announcement yet on PC. Despite the fact that we crossed the 20th anniversary and now we are officially like past that release date. But I'm imagining something next week, probably during the actual work week, will be announced for Kingdom Hearts coming to Steam or in the next couple months. I could imagine them also maybe they're gearing something up. There might be some more releases. I wouldn't be surprised if there was another Kingdom Hearts announcement they want to time it with. Be great if it was the Disney Plus series that like got leaked a couple of years ago, but we'll see. Um, yeah, that was the one time like I saw a visual upgrade and stuff, and it didn't really was with Kingdom Hearts. But yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy amazing as well. Just seeing some, it is really crazy, and I was trying to think if there's anything else really. I feel like, I mean, other than just gushing about games that look pretty or run well, like stuff
Yeah,
like
that's like
that.
half that's like been like half the
Um,
episode. Oh, this game looks so great. And it's like I said, it's just so many games that look so great. So it's like hard not to be positive about the ones that we've enjoyed.
Now, I know it's always difficult to talk about it because games are art, and this is something where I think when people have a specific vision, it's always tough to say like you need to do this. But I've fallen on the side of the argument for video games because the actual responsiveness as controls matter as this being an interactive element. It's an interactive medium. You need to have games, especially if timing's an issue. And I almost don't want to give any sort of um, exception to this rule, but I'm of the mind that we need to have 60 FPS minimum. You really like it should be part of like standards and practices where like games are not allowed to release that don't have minimum 60 FPS support. Um, Ed, how do you feel about like that idea? Do you think that like performance, like we should move the ceiling up from, or the floor, I should say, from 30 to 60 now that you've had this experience?
You mean like that would be like a, a, a bullet point in like QA certification on a console? Like Sony says that every game has to be 60 FPS.
Yeah, minimum.
Um I think it's good to give consumers options, but I might say that they have to have a mode that supports 60 FPS. But I don't know if I would say that they can't have an option with higher fidelity that lowers the frame rate.
Okay.
But I don't know. I guess I don't know enough I don't know enough about game development to say like if having that option for a lower frame rate makes the higher frame rate option worse, where they don't put the resources into it. I don't know really what goes into optimizing a game for a specific frame rate, like how they figure out what concessions they have to make graphically to achieve that. And I wonder that like maybe maybe it's the is it's a fact that going into developing a game, like you have a certain art style you want to hit, and you kind of think you're going to be able to optimize it for 60 FPS, but you get so far in the development process and you're finding that, well, maybe we're only hitting 50 consistently. Like, I mean, you can tell the dev that they have to re-architect their entire game. Just like it, it's tough because yeah, you'd like everything to be 60 FPS, but I don't know. Maybe the development process is maybe they go into it with the best intentions and find out that it. I really don't know enough about game development to say how hard it is to actually hit that target. At the very least, that's a good reason why VRR is so important, because if you do have a game that's mostly 60 and dips to like 55, 50 frames per second occasionally, like variable refresh rate is helps to smooth that out. So Sony's got to get off their butts and figure that out. They've not done a good job with some of the next gen features of the PlayStation 5.
They did announce again on PlayStation Blog that like more news is coming. Like they're getting ready
They
for it.
announced it, but it
Announced
should
an
have been there
announcement.
day
Yeah,
one. It
yeah,
should have been there day one.
yeah. Who knows why they're hemming it? It'll be. It's always really funny that they just want to be so proprietary.
Or
Yeah.
their TVs don't do VRR well either. They have to like sacrifice a bunch of features to get them to do it. They're late. They're like they I was gonna get one of their TVs, and I'm glad I didn't, because apparently they just botched the whole rollout of VRR on their TVs.
What I was gonna say is like I can understand. I think your point about just let them have the option or requiring an option for 60 FPS. Yeah, that's probably the more reasonable approach. When it comes to development, while I'm not a developer, I'm not super educated, but I've been trying to educate myself by like listening to developers and that. I think it still comes down to the fact is they know this technology, they know how to work around limits. So if you set the standard as like the game has to be running at 60 FPS, then you just design around that sets like how much graphic fidelity you can have or where things are and things like that. And tech is getting better. Like you've said, there's other peripheral tech that's also doing there. I would say just design for that because since the game is interactive, that frame rate directly impacts how responsive games feel. And you can even see it with if you look at data and TV reviews for TVs that have like 120 hertz rates and also monitors and stuff like that. The higher and higher, you can look up some good videos on YouTube as well about how refresh rate works and how that affects gameplay latency for the controls. You can see that the higher we go in frame rate, because of the way the tech has to work, latency and controls get smaller and smaller, and you get much more responsive gameplay. So that is my position on why I think setting the frame rate standard matters in video games and should be like the baseline, and then you design everything around that. Because if you're hitting that target frame rate, you're hitting a certain level of responsiveness, and that makes the game feel better in general. And so that's where I come from. Now, I'm open to hearing developers, but I don't know if there's any developer that could literally say, like, no, you literally can't design for frame rate, um, for X, Y, and Z reasons. When it's a technical aspect that I feel is like it depends on what you want. Like it'd be like the same thing if I said, well, everything's got to be native 4K. You have to use a native resolution, no like dynamic resolution changes or things like that, which is kind of silly. But that's kind of the point there. Is so if I said you had to do 4K, someone going, we literally can't design for 4K. Do you realize how much we have to sacrifice for it? And be like, I don't care. Like, and that's kind of what
Well,
publishers did.
I think part of it is like they're trying to push the graphics as much as they can. So they might be designing for 60 FPS, but maybe there's moments where like they're pushing the envelope a bit too much, and like, are you gonna not certify a game because it drops to 55 FPS in a certain scene? Like, are you gonna have like digital foundry levels of technical analysis, and like if it doesn't meet a certain like
I think
I mean, I think they could design for 60 FPS, but they're gonna like if the bar is here, they're not gonna be able to come as close to the graphical. Like they're gonna have to leave themselves some leeway and to really meet that. So like it's a balancing act, I think.
Right, but I'm totally the person that's okay with the visual fidelity or saying, like, because I'm a fan of stylizing. We can look at, like, the way Nintendo games do their stylizing or games. We can look at other games, third-party games like Guilty Gear Strive and Dragon Ball Fighters and some other anime games where, like, because they don't do super high resolution textures, their game file size just isn't huge. So there's other compromises that you can have, but you can still achieve a stylistically beautiful game. It just happens that sometimes these visions that the developers have doesn't match the tech or the capabilities to achieve, both of those things. So we're getting better, and there's tech that fixes that. But at the same time, I would look at a developer and go like, if you can't achieve your vision at 60 FPS, use a different vision. Like, I'm sure you don't have just one vision. Like, and granted, that's a bit of a rude argument to make, but as the consumer for gameplay and wanting things to feel good and games to play well, that's it's a hard line stance, and I feel like the industry most developers I'm sure are fine with that. It's mostly been publishers going, the game needs to be pretty for screenshots, so who cares about it once they spend the money. They can't even feel the frame rate. They can't feel the frame rate in a screenshot, and they can't feel the frame rate until they've paid us $60 to buy the new game. Like, that's the way publishers think, and that's why things happen that way. Now, luckily, that's made a huge change now with stuff. And you see big competitive games like Call of Duty's always been 60 FPS, Fortnite 60. It's pushing for 120 now with the newer consoles as well as that way on PC. They're all the Twitch streamers and stuff. A lot of them doing both PC gaming and console gaming to some degree. Talk about performance and talk about these things. Not every one of them is educated about it properly, but the conversation is now more alive than ever, which filters into the more uh, common consumer and game player. So they're more aware of something and not fully educated, but at least talking about it, thinking about it, and so it's becoming a market reality that they have to be this way, and that the market cares about it, which is
It'll be
very
I
cool.
I would really be interested to see, like, I'm sure all these developers are collecting telemetry on, like, what settings people choose, whether it's performance or fidelity mode. I would be interested to see, like, what percentage of people first of all, like, what do they default to? Like, are they defaulting to performance mode? Are they default like, I feel like games should default to performance mode just to kinda, like, at least give people a chance to see how it feels. Because a lot of people might not even be going and changing the settings. They might not even know that it's a setting difference. So it's like I would be interested to see what percentage of people really are choosing to either select performance mode or this is all from a console perspective.
Sure, yeah.
Obviously, on PC, you have all this. Most games, you have a lot of granularity over what settings you can choose, so that is maybe a little more complicated. But on console, it's pretty much two, maybe three options. I wonder what people are choosing. I wish to. It'd be nice if we could get some transparency on that.
Yeah, and I want to transition into a different topic because I think we should talk about peripheral technology that affects this. Because and I have a good anecdote, but I did want to point out just to be apparent. This is part of why, like, I'm a little afraid of Elden Ring's success. Japanese developers have been slow to really embrace PC and understand how to properly optimize for PC because their uh, Japan itself is not very PC gaming focused. They're much more console focused. It's just been a cultural thing that, like, computers are for work, not for play, etc. So and they're very urban society, so they like go out and you know don't stay home too much, especially in the cities where there'd be the highest population density. Rural parts of it, that's different and whatnot. Um, but that's where, like, we see some of that, and so I appreciate that Elden Ring is a well designed game, and in most aspects or in some specific aspects. And then it's really a shame to see that, like, performance couldn't get nailed. Now, I'm not saying that open world games don't have their issues, or like you said, there's leeway. Like in a cutscene, it's not interactive. It's kind of in it's embarrassing if your cutscene doesn't run properly. But, like, if you're gonna do like 30 FPS cutscenes just because that means it's a smaller video file or whatever, but then there's also like, what if it's in engine? How does that work, etc. Whatever. Um, That's a different conversation. I wouldn't mind that, or during loading screens, like, even though that's a thing kind of going away due to technology. So that's the other thing. We're getting better graphics cards, we're getting better CPUs, we're getting better memory and faster memory. So some of these issues are getting um, uh, fixed through brute force of just getting better technology. You're talking about variable refresh rate. So that's something where the system itself needs to support it, but also your monitor. Computer monitors, you can find a lot of them with higher refresh support and more variable refresh as we go on. Then there's I don't think it's I don't remember if it's a form of, yeah, it is a form of variable refresh rate. G-Sync, NVIDIA's G-Sync and AMD's FreeSync. So that helps eliminate screen tearing as well as managing the frame rate, like variable frame rates and stuff. So some of that is being addressed, and it's great that it is, because it helps smooth out the experience. Because some tech is, like you said, it's tough. Like, having a little bit of wiggle room and room for error is definitely helpful, and I prefer that. I just want the target to default to 60 now instead of allowing 30 to still be around, because it's just that we don't really need it. Uh, or it's not. There's a significant difference in feel between 30 and 60, to the point that it's just, why are we still doing? Why are we still here? Um, but that's another thing, is like the tech needs to be there, and I don't think a lot of people understand with TVs. So, oh yeah, and I wanted to talk about with TVs. Ed, your TV, since it's newer, probably does this automatically. Like, do you know if your TV has like a game mode?
Mhm.
Do you notice
Yeah, it does.
does a sign like pop up when you're like turning on PlayStation 5 or your Xbox, and like, does it say like going into game mode or game mode on, mode off?
I don't know if it does for PlayStation 5. I don't know if I've seen a sign, but I'm pretty sure I have it set to do that on Xbox.
All right. Double check that in your TV settings too, because way back when, do you remember the Xbox during the Xbox and PS3 years, and like shortly into the PS4 in Xbox One days of TVs, and their fake refresh rates and the motion smoothing and like movie modes and all that?
I don't remember much about that. I don't know if I paid attention as much back then.
Okay. So to give you and our listeners kind of a little recap of what was happening, is during the boom of the TVs into the 1080p and the early 4K era, TV started having a motion smoothing mode, which was there to, like, because movies run at typically 24 frames per second, and also TV shows typically run at 24 frames per second. And this was known as like the soap opera effect, where the technology in the TV interpolated frames, which basically meant that using computers and it guessed what frames would look like, and so it would artificially improve the frame rate, or I should say, artificially change how many frames the image was producing, and it would create this smoothing effect where it wouldn't look as stuttery, but things could look off. And because most graphical effects and things for or special effects for TVs and movies were made for 24 FPS, they didn't always translate well to a higher frame rate, whether that was real or simulated. And so what was happening is, with games, people were doing this as well, for like, turn it on during 30 FPS, or wouldn't switch off the mode because the TVs would automatically do this. And what happens is, to do that mode, and you can hear about this with any other like TVs with all their special visual effect modes to try and make movies look as good as possible with post processing, is the term. It increases the input lag, because the TV needs to apply all that stuff to the TV, to the visual signal. So even back then, games could feel worse, because all these extra things that the TV had in it were features for movies, which were passive mediums, not for games with interactive. So a lot of people also were like experiencing way worse performance and lag, because their games were being artificially slowed down because of the way their TVs were doing features. That's much more avoidable now. And like they said, there's the game modes, there's ways, which is ways for the TV manufacturers to make sure they're turning off as many post processing settings as possible to lower that lag, because more people are hooking up PCs to get to TVs. and more people are gaming with TV are gaming on their TVs and need higher frame rates and stuff. That was another thing. So I double check definitely on your TV and stuff and make sure that you're getting that
I'm pretty
lowest.
sure it's on game mode. I'll check though.
Yeah, because sometimes like for Switch, it doesn't automatically kick on for me. I need to go in and manually kick it on my TV. And that was something I noticed when we were playing Smash Brothers online at one point. I'm like, huh, why does this, like, when we're playing online, it was already, the online was bad enough, and then it improved when we did Ethernet, which was great, but it was still like at one point I'm like, this doesn't feel nearly as good as it did as this one time before. And then when I was thinking about it, I realized I had unplugged the dock once and reconnected it, and because of the way Samsung's TV's operating systems work, it like immediately
Mhm.
forgets inputs once they're unplugged, for
Oh.
the most part. And so then when I went back in and checked, I'm like, "Oh, it wasn't kicking into game mode." And when I kicked it into game mode online, I now had the normal amount of responsiveness my buttons should have mixed with whatever the normal. So it doesn't always kick on automatically for each system, and sometimes it might not even be saved if you've ever, unplugged your system, whether that was to move something or you just want
Yeah,
to.
and you don't necessarily even want it on game mode if you're watching like a movie on your Xbox.
That can be dynamic though too, because on my PS5, it will dynamically kick out of game mode for movies.
Mhm.
There
Yeah,
is
yeah.
signal detection on that. That
Yeah.
you just need to make sure it's on by, like, natural.
I only play games on my consoles. I watch all my movies on my Apple TV.
But for people who do, because I still buy Blu-rays, I like to have the Blu-rays so I could, like, give them to people, or, I have them and I don't have to worry
Yeah.
about needing an internet connection to watch something. So, um, that's a thing too, like, some of this tech or, also regarding TVs or even monitors, you need the right ports on your TVs, and sometimes like the HDMI 2.1 is the one that's like really good for like 4K, 120, VRR, and so on. And you can still find TVs now with only like one, and you need one, or you need the right model. So there's all this tech here, and that's just an issue as well. Like it's great that we have this assistive technology, it's just not standardizing fast enough, and also the manufacturers aren't being as transparent as they could about this for all sorts of reasons. So while performance and graphics, like some of that lies on console makers and developers and game makers and stuff for those things, uh, there's all this peripheral tech that also can affect it as well. And so there's a lot for the consumer. I think it's important to talk about that and realize, like, raise awareness that it's like, hey, not everything needs to jive and sync, and like it's getting closer to like kind of like PC maintenance. Um,
And right now, a lot of TVs that might support all those features have like a poor implementation of it. Like the Sony TVs, um, they're when they go into supporting variable refresh rate, I think they turn off local dimming, so like you lose some of the features of their TVs when you turn on other features, and that's common. So some of the lower end TVs have that issue. So it's like, and I mean, it's actually not even lower end. Sony's not a lower end TV, and they just didn't do a good job with it. So it's like, um, you really have to do your research. I mean, I remember like looking into like forums posts about the TV I was looking at because I was reading some issue of it, and then I was reading, oh wait, it actually was fixed in this latest firmware update, so like you're good to go. It's like it's a minefield out there right now. And maybe in a few years when all these features are more fully realized and fleshed out, like it won't be as much as an issue looking for a TV. But right now, if you're trying to be on the cutting edge, you got to do your research.
there's some new tech that's HDR was another big thing. Like HDR also slows down input and
Yeah.
more post processing and stuff like that. So it's not always recommended. It seems to be pretty good, but that can also be very TV. Um, yeah, we're nearing the end of the episode here, so that was definitely something there. Yeah, we talked about the performance and the visuals there. Uh, I don't know. I feel like I've kind of covered everything I wanted to talk about today. Ed, was there anything else regarding video game performance or video game graphics and visuals that you want?
Um, I don't think so. I'm just happy that we do have a lot of good options.
Things have
So
gotten much
it does
better.
it does really stink though when a game you're interested in like turns out to have issues because like you get all excited. I guess really that the lesson there is never get excited about anything until it's like in your hands.
Try before you buy. I
Yeah.
recommend it. Like it's not hard to go look at some YouTube reviews or Twitch streams if things are running well, or wait for some uh for like a digital foundry or technical.
Mhm.
There's some places that are definitely more reliable than others. That information. Oh yeah, you know what? Let's end on this funny question here because Ed, like, basically, I think we both tried to avoid really like beating the Switch into the ground for being this like technically underpowered device. Oh, and hopefully by the time you're listening to this, I have my Steam Deck. But we'll see about that. I'll probably talk about that at some. But with the Switch, like, do you think that if we're rating games on a 10 out of 10 scale, like across the board, do you think uh, that if, when you're reviewing a game, and even if it doesn't have like um another version on like PlayStation or Xbox, so let's say like should Breath of the Wild being like 60 or its inconsistent frame rate, and we're talking like vanilla Breath of the Wild where it was like really unstable in a lot of places or really bad, or even like the Pokemon Legends, or not Pokemon Legends, Pokemon Sword and Shield, where that one wild area and stuff was really bad with its. You feel like we should universally across the board compare the game's performances and be like, look, on PlayStation, Xbox, you can get this. So like this is what games should be. Like it is appalling that Switch is here, so you should automatically dock a point because it's not running as well as it could. And like we were saying before, like scaling your vision to the hardware you're on. Do you feel like that's fair, or do you think it should be reviewed within the platform it's based on? So if it's like an exclusive, you'd be like, well, you can only get it on the Switch here unless you pirate it and put it on an emulation machine and artificially juice it up. Do you feel like that's fair, or do you think like performance needs to be for reviews siloed into its respective platforms' capability?
I think for multi-platform games that also have a Switch version, the Switch version should probably get a lower score if it's like a worse version of the game because it just is. Like why would versions that are not equivalent get the same score? Um so, a lot of games like there's a lot of concessions that have to be made to get it on the Switch. And I guess maybe people feel that just because the option to have the option to play it portably, that it has some merit to it. But I don't know. I don't play portable games very much. I guess it's nice to be able to take my Switch when I travel, but even then, like I'm mostly playing games on the Switch that are for the Switch. But as far as exclusives go, I think yeah, I think if it's like especially bad, like really dipping into like 20s or lower, then I think they should dock a point. But if it's like a solid 30, then I'm okay with them just being like, this is pretty typical for the Switch. And um that's kind of what you can expect on the Switch. Some games run 60 like Mario Kart and Smash, but most of them like a solid 30 with no dips is about what you can expect. And I think that's about what Switch players are used to if they're playing exclusives. But any lower than that, I think you should dock points.
All right. And then one last point, just because this. So where do you think? What would you review Mario Golf based on Mario Golf Super Rush, based on everything we've talked about in terms of like the performance and graphics, like, and we've played a bunch of it. How do you feel that one? Because it's kind of a turn-based game. The frame rate really doesn't get in the way much of the actual gameplay or things
Is
like
it
that.
really bad?
Mario Golf?
Yeah. I mean, I think we played it online, so I think a lot of the stuttering we've gotten is because of the online, not necessarily like, or I haven't actually, or I guess I'll say I don't know if the reason why some of the frame rate stutters is because of online or not, because I almost exclusively play it online with you guys.
I'm just talking about
So
like
do we?
also the textures and popping and like the environment and stuff. Like, You can
I
bundle
don't
them together
notice the
except for
pop
one.
in much because I'm not really navigating the environment. Because we don't play speed golf. I hate speed golf. Um,
I was
but yeah, the textures are not great, and
a very low fidelity game. Very
yeah,
but yeah, like I said, it doesn't really get in the way of the game. Like it is what it is. Uh, yeah, I was just curious. I was curious if you'd have a funny response to be like, "Oh yeah, no, that's a 3 out of 10."
I think 7 and 8 are fine for that game because it's like it's not even that great of a Mario sports game. Like it's fun, but it's got a lot of jank and annoyance to it that I don't enjoy, and I don't
Does have some.
necessarily. Yeah, we've had some moments where just we're like, man, this is nonsense, and I have some choice words for it, but
Yes,
I'm
we
not going
do.
to use them.
You have some very choice words. All right. Well, thank you again, Ed, for being with me on the episode, and thank you to all our listeners who in past, present, and future. We hope you all do well until the next time. Yeah. Until then, take care.
Bye.